schizophrenia is and around the diagnosis. The media is quite heavily to blame for this, so how people are characterised in dramas, what's reported in the news. If you hear about someone on the news with schizophrenia, it's likely because they've committed a crime, a violent crime. But that is a very, very small proportion of people with schizophrenia. Most people with schizophrenia live a normal, functional life, and you may not actually know that they have schizophrenia. Okay? In terms of being violent, although people with schizophrenia may be violent, they're more likely to be violent towards themselves or to be victims of violent crime. Okay? So just consider those things. And because of that stigma, it's another reason why people may delay going to the GP and getting help, which will make their thought patterns, their behaviour be worse because it won't be managed. Okay? So there's a lot of work trying, well, in all mental health disorders really, trying to reduce stigma so that things can be managed more effectively and people can live normal lives. Right, so I think Tom's already spoken about psychosis. Here is a loss of contact with reality shown through positive symptoms. We'll list some positive symptoms in a minute. They're basically additional symptoms that somebody will have that healthy people wouldn't necessarily experience, okay? And in the acute phase, people experience mainly positive symptoms in their psychosis. In the chronic phase, people will still have some positive symptoms, such as psychosis, but they will have mainly negative symptoms. So this is a lack of a behaviour that we would all have, okay? So it's about an additional behaviour or a lack of behaviour. And it's the kind of combination of these positive and negative symptoms that doctors will make their diagnosis on, so it clusters those. Right, so let's run through some of these. So your positive symptoms include hallucinations, so they can be any of the senses. It may be auditory hallucinations, it may be smells, it may be something that people are seeing. And these are things that we obviously wouldn't experience. And voices are the most common, so auditory hallucinations are the most common. And it will be something that someone experiences as a heard thing. It's not like inner speech, it's something that they feel they can actually hear. And studies have shown the areas of the brain lighting up that would be lighting up just when you're listening to me talking here. Delusions, so a kind of firmly held belief that wouldn't be accepted by the people around them. So a paranoid delusion would be an example of this, an idea that their partner's cheating on them, they're a spy, they're being persecuted, and they're hearing messages about that. Thought disorder, so what we're going to focus on mainly. So you could define it very basically and say it's muddled thought, but it's much more complex than this, and we're going to go through it soon. And then disorganised behaviour. So you can imagine that if you're experiencing all of these things, then your behaviour is going to be slightly odd. It's going to be affected by those things. The negative symptoms tend to become apparent when the psychosis has calmed down, okay? And as I said, mainly in the chronic stages. So someone might experience lack of motivation, they may socially withdraw, feel like they don't enjoy anything. So there's a kind of an apathy, not wanting to get out of bed, leave the house, not feeling interested in anything. It may be that somebody doesn't look after themselves, so they don't wash themselves, they don't wash their clothes. So their appearance, apart from any of their other behaviours, might impact on the way that someone communicates with them. They may have reduced facial expression, so the non-verbal communication is going to be affected, and reduced verbal expression as well. So as I said before, diagnosis is about identifying cases of these features. There's a lot of debate. If you read more about schizophrenia, you'll find there's a lot of debate around the use of the label itself. So a lot of people say it's not a useful label because of what it has attached to it, and that it's better just to describe the individual characteristics. But as you'll know from your other learning, labels can be useful because they help to direct the treatments that we give to people, and they do help family and friends to have some kind of understanding and to direct their further research about it themselves. So, but what's really important is that it always focuses on the individual, because you can see from some of these things, they could be influenced by the kind of people they're communicating with, their support network, the environment they're in. And their past experiences as well may influence how they behave. Okay, so it needs to be about the individual. Okay, so let's talk about thought disorder. So there's disagreement, I think, in everything we're going to talk about today. So there's disagreement about how to define a thought disorder. So there's two potential definitions here, one from the literature and one I think Judy might have put together. So thought disorder, from the Royal College of Psychiatrists, is when someone is not thinking straight and it's hard to make sense of what they're saying. Their ideas may be jumbled up, which is more than being muddled or confused. So what I said before, just about muddled thought, it doesn't quite capture it. And then the second thought disorder is broadly defined as thinking that is not logical or coherent and shows a loss of contact with reality. And the important thing for us here is this is evident through the individual's speech, language and communication. Okay? So that this idea that the communication, the language gives us a window in to their thought processes. So we're able to describe their thought through what we observe through language and communication. So incoherence in thought might be mirrored by incoherence in language as well. So some people think that's the best way to evaluate it. So, does everyone have handouts with them? No? Right, okay. I'll have to muddle with the video in a minute. So have a read through this here. I'm not going to read it out for you. Just take a few minutes to read through. This is NC, a gentleman in his 50s with schizophrenia. Have a read through, think about, is it comprehensible to you, and do you think you can tell anything about his thought through what you're reading? Yeah, which it makes it more complicated if language has been affected as well.
What was like thoughts going deeper?
Yeah, so do people get a sense of speed and urgency through this? So we've got one long pause and a couple of pauses. There's lots of jumping about, okay? There's lots of mini pauses and then maybe starting something new. And there's this sense of urgency through it. I'll go on to the next slide. So an important question to consider is if this is a disruption to thinking, so if the person's thinking is distorted in some way, and this is shown through their language and communication behaviour, so is it really showing us the thinking? Is it a disruption to language? So their thinking is intact, but they're unable to communicate that through their language, so it's very disordered. Or is it a combination of those two? And basically, it's very complicated. So we have to consider both their thought being disordered and their language being disordered. And the fact that thought and language don't always correlate. So we know that we can, I could be thinking one thing and I can say another to you. So I don't have to let all of my thoughts be known to you. So we can be duplicitous, if you like. And we also know, from what we know about people with aphasia, that people can have very intact thought and not be able to communicate it through their language. So we know that the two don't always correlate. So we need to be a bit cautious when we're interpreting things through the language, okay? But there are things that we can learn. Right, now, I'm going to show you a bit of video, although I don't know if it's in exactly the same place, at the right place. But we'll have a look. If it doesn't work, I'll come back to it at the end. Oh, it's absolutely perfect. Right, okay, so this, have you seen some of this video before with Julie? Probably Tom, very successfully using it. So they're going to tell, so they're actors on this video. It's going to tell you what to account for. I don't want you to focus too much because we haven't discussed all of the things that they're going to list. But I'll just down on your handout, it will say on the next slide when I show it to you. Just think about whether he's communicating well, whether you understand what he's saying, whether you can follow what he's saying, and if there's any words that come to mind to describe his spoken language and communication. Okay.
Persecutory delusion. grandiose delusion, delusional perception, auditory hallucinations, made act, and somatic passivity.
What was this problem that you felt you had with the police?
They've been following me recently. They've got a hearing done and they're pointing at my house.
When did all this start?
I was going into town and I saw a number 30 bus, and I know it should have been a number 22. And this is really important because I knew that God has chosen me for a special mission, just me for this mission.
What is this mission?
I don't know yet.
You don't know. And how are the police involved with that?
Well, they know about this. I think they're going to try and eliminate me.
Right. How do you know that God has chosen you in particular for this mission?
Well, there was the bus number.
Mm-hmm.
And there are these demons that are talking about me. They're arguing and discussing me. And sometimes they sort of comment on everything I do and tell each other about it.
Right. Could I hear these demons?
No,
No.
they speak inside my head.
Right. Do the demons ever hurt you?
Yeah, sometimes they make my hands move and do things. Sometimes it tingles. Could be the police.
Right.
I don't know whether it's the police or the demons.
How long have you been experiencing that?
It's been a couple of months.
Right. Is there any possibility that you could be mistaken about this?
No, I know what's happening. Dad, don't want to talk anymore. Could be dangerous.
Right.
Okay, right, so let's stop that there. Right, okay. So that's quite different from what you've just been reading. But do you think that he communicates well? Yeah, so there's quite a good interaction there, there's turn-taking. What about whether you understand what he's saying? So the content and form of what he's saying, is it understandable? Yeah? Can you follow what he's saying logically? Yeah, so apart from it seeming a very strange thing for someone to experience, we're following kind of the meaning of what he's saying. Are there any words that you would describe as spoken language and communication? Think about non-verbal communication as well. Do you notice anything about his facial expression, or is it?
His eye contact wasn't great.
Yeah, so eye contact's fairly poor, isn't it? Was there a great range of facial expression, do you think? No, was it fairly flat? What about the tone of his voice? Seem appropriate? Seem a bit monotone? Sure. What do you think your experience would be of being the other person that he was talking to? How do you think it would feel? A bit scared? Would you know how to respond? No? Okay, and we'll talk about that a bit later on. I'm not going to, you can, there's no need for this, for the purpose of this module, for you to know about the things like made act, or you can kind of get a sense of the fact that he feels like somebody's actually physically making him do things, but don't worry too much about those. It's just basically to give you a bit of an idea of what the content really and the form of what you might be saying. What we're going to do now is we're going to run through Andreassen's abnormalities of thought, language and communication, and these are the things I want you to focus on to come out of this lecture with. So Andreassen, she is an American psychiatrist who devised the definitions for schizophrenia that are in the DSM-3, the manual that describes the mental health disorder that you're learning about. And as part of this work, she set out clear descriptions of the features of language and communication shown in thought disorder. So we're going to look through a list. So if you do... Right, that's what we can do. That says wrong word references at the bottom. So if you glance through some of these, We're not going to talk through all of them. There's some of them that you might recognise. So you might recognise neologisms, so new words, words that don't really have any meaning for you. Paraphasias, so you might know these as semantic, phonological paraphasias, so selecting the wrong word that might have some kind of relationship to the one that was intended. Echolalia, so repeating back something that's just been heard. And we're going to run through more of these. I think the only one we won't look at in detail that I'd like you to know about is poverty of speech content. So this idea that someone can be saying quite a lot, but it's relatively empty, so they're not communicating a lot through the content. But the article on the end of the handout talks through all of these in detail. Okay. So I'll run through these and then we'll look at the examples. So poverty of speech. So this is a restriction in the amount of spontaneous speech. So that replies to questions tend to be brief, concrete and unelaborated. And unprompted additional information is rare. This is a weekly ward round before speech and language therapy intervention. And this is recorded in one of Judy's articles. So I don't actually think it's on the back of it, so I'll put that on Mhld for you, the link to that. So I'll read through it. So the doctor, hello PQ, come in and sit down. Do you know everyone here? PQ nods his head to indicate yes. So how are you getting on this week? Okay. Pause for 4 seconds. I gather the medication has been causing excess salivation. Has it been happening a lot? Bit of salivation occasionally, and then quite a long pause. When does this happen? Possibly at night. An even longer pause. What have you enjoyed doing this weekend on the ward, PQ? Possibly relaxation? Another pause. What do you feel you benefit from by doing the relaxation sessions? To relax? Get a bit uptight. So you can see that there's not a lot that PQ is giving there. And if the questions weren't coming, there'd probably be nothing at all. There's no initiation. Trying to get away with giving as little as possible. And kind of not very committal as well. Not very, so a lot of possibly, not really committing to that statement that they're making. Okay? So that's poverty of speech. Pressure of speech is something that you might have been sensing through the first transcript that we read. So it's an increase in the amount of spontaneous speech as compared with what is considered or socially customary. The patient talks rapidly and is very difficult to interrupt. So it's the opposite of the poverty of speech. So it might be appropriate for them to give a very brief reply, but they may give a very, very lengthy reply instead. Distractible speech. So Andreasen describes this as during the course of a discussion or interview, the patient repeatedly stops talking in the middle of a sentence or idea and changes the subject in response to stimulus. It might be that they're just talking happily and then they notice the tie that the person that they're speaking to has got on and just start talking about that tie instead. So very distractible by things in the environment. Tangentiality. So replying to a question in an oblique, tangential or even irrelevant manner, or the reply may be unrelated and seem totally irrelevant. Okay, so it may have some kind of relation or it may not. And this relates really just to the response to a question. Okay, so it's only when it's a response to a question, because as you'll see in the next one, that people can go off on tangents just within their own speech as well. So associate that with a question. As opposed to derailment, which is also referred to as loose associations or flight of ideas, which is a pattern of spontaneous speech in which the ideas slip off the track onto another one that is clearly but obliquely related, or onto one that is completely unrelated. Okay? So it may be that they start on one topic and they're slipping slowly, they jump to another topic, and they end up miles away from where they started. Although you may not have been that aware as you went along how far you were jumping. Okay? So it's very disjointed. You can't find, if you think about what a narrative should be like, with structure, with a thread, there's no thread to these kind of narratives. Incoherence, so a pattern of speech that is essentially incomprehensible at times. Okay? So it sounds, it can be a little bit similar to something like jargon aphasia, so, but not necessarily full of completely incomprehensible speech. It may be the meaning is incomprehensible, the syntax is incomprehensible. So it, you know, it's a very ungrammatical narrative that are given. Illogical is a pattern of speech in which conclusions speech that don't follow logically. And this can be something that we could describe a man in the video as doing this. So it can be related to kind of delusional beliefs. So we can follow what's being said, but it won't be something that we would think would follow logically. So we wouldn't look at a number 22 on a bus and feel that that was significant for us, that was a message that was coming to us. Perseveration, you've probably heard of, so persistent repetition of words, ideas and subjects, so that once a patient begins a particular subject or uses a particular word, you would continually return to that in the process of speaking. So think beyond words for this. Clanging is a very unusual one, so a pattern of speech in which sounds rather than meaningful relationships appear to govern word choice. So the intelligibility of the speech is impaired and redundant words introduced. So if you can see this, so a man named Stan liked to eat spam. Stan lived in a tin can. So meaning is completely chucked out the window, and rhyming is prioritised, okay? So that's clanging, and Sushi Dobinson is a speech and language therapist. Right. And there's also use of unusual words, ambiguous word meanings. I want us to get on to looking at the narrative samples that we've got in the picture description. So I'll leave you to look at this in your own time. The ambiguous word that is used is the word blue that's introduced right at the end, okay? So have a read through this in your own time. And it's basically when a word is introduced that just doesn't sit quite right in the narrative, and it kind of sticks out to you and you think, I'm not quite understanding why you've used that word. You may understand where there may be some kind of link to why they're using the word, but it just sticks out to you as a little bit of an unusual selection. Right, okay. So this is going to be easier for people who have printed out the samples. Are people in there? Yeah? Right, okay. So what I want you to do is go into detail for you. They're nice, short, very accessible, easy to read. So you need to think about the client-centered approach. So clients often want to talk about the content of their psychotic symptoms, and that can be very difficult for people. And there are different opinions on this. So one is not to encourage or not to collude in the person's psychotic beliefs, because it might encourage their belief in this non-reality. You've come across this idea in dementia as well, and when someone's saying something, someone comes to you and says, "Are you my mother?" whether you go along with that or not. Some people say that engaging in those symptoms, what they're saying to you, enables the professional to share and learn from the client's experiences. So in one of the Mhld articles, it discusses what the doctor says in response to someone saying, "Why don't these people believe me when I say I am God?" And the doctor gets a bit stuck. Does he just try and change tack, lead on to something else? Does he try and identify some of the feelings that are being communicated? Does he try to find an aspect of it that they could talk about further? So read that article if you want to know more about that. You'll find there isn't one right answer, but there is this sense that we can't just ignore these statements altogether. That what that tends to result in is somebody being very confrontational about that the person's unlikely to let it go. So you need to find a way to communicate about that without colluding. So clients are very aware of when they have insight, they're aware of when you're uncomfortable with talking about those psychotic symptoms. So Mhld and colleagues argue that client-centered approach can improve client-patient outcomes, that when you do actually find a way to acknowledge this and communicate about it, you can get increased compliance and more client satisfaction. And Sushi Dobson, the speech and language therapist that I mentioned before, gives some strategies for communicating with people with mental health difficulties. And kind of the subsections how to respond for paranoid ideas, for thought disordered speech, if someone's isolated. So that's really just for you to refer to yourselves. This is obviously a specialist client group, so if you go into research or clinical work with this client group, you're obviously going to receive training to be learning more about this. For the sake of this module and what you're learning within this, focus on Andreassen's framework, understanding thought disorder, being able to define schizophrenia and thought disorder, okay? So that's what you need for this, and then you can support your learning if you go on to work with people in the future. Okay? That really is just going through what I've already said. Right, all done.